Something happened in Cleveland today that the mainstream football conversation is going to dramatically undersell, misframe, or flat out ignore. And that's exactly why we're here. Because when multiple significant things drop at the same time, the noise machine has a habit of picking one thread, pulling it, and leaving every other critical piece of information on the floor where nobody sees it. That's not happening today. Not here. Because what came out of Brown's practice today wasn't just a stat line or a coaching soundbite or a feel-good story about a young quarterback finding his footing. It was a convergence, a moment where the numbers, the film, the coaching language, and the organizational logic all pointed in the same direction at the same time. And if you're paying attention with honest eyes, the picture that emerges is not subtle, it is not ambiguous, and it is not the picture that a significant portion of the media narrative around this quarterback competition has been painting for weeks. So we're going to build this from the ground up, every layer, every detail, because the Isaiah Bond touchdown pass alone deserves its own dedicated breakdown. Because Coach Kevin Monken's words today carry layers of meaning that the surface reading completely fails to capture. Because Shedeur Sanders going 7 for 15 with 3 touchdowns in a competitive practice session is not a footnote, it's a statement. And because the way Monken spoke about meeting Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, adds a dimension to this story that cynical framing has been trying to poison since the moment Shedeur walked through that Cleveland building. Stay with this. All of it matters, and by the time we're done, the full picture will be built in front of you. Not a partial view, not a media-filtered version, but the honest, complete, analytically sound picture that this situation actually demands. Let's start with the practice QB tracker, because the performance is the foundation on which everything else sits. You can layer coaching commentary on top of it, you can build organizational narratives around it, you can frame the competition any way the media wants to frame it, but what actually happened when these quarterbacks stepped onto that practice field with coaches watching and evaluations being recorded, that's the bedrock. That's where we start. Shedeur Sanders, 7 completions on 15 attempts, 3 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Deshaun Watson, 9 completions on 17 attempts, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. Those are the numbers. They are accurate, they are on the record. And before the completion percentage crowd rushes in to diminish what Shedeur did today, we need to deal with the context those numbers demand. Because the completion percentage argument, while surface-level logical, completely collapses when you understand what the numbers around it actually say. 7 completions on 15 attempts sounds modest until you realize that 3 of those 7 completions were touchdowns. That is a touchdown rate that most NFL starting quarterbacks would be thrilled to post in a live game environment, let alone a practice session against a defense that is being coached, evaluated, and prepared with the same intensity as the offense on the other side of the ball. 3 touchdown throws in that kind of environment is not a small statistical achievement buried in a practice report that you scroll past on your phone. That is a significant output from a quarterback operating with confidence, conviction, in the kind of decision-making that prioritizes explosive production over the kind of safe, conservative check-down football that protects your completion percentage while contributing absolutely nothing to winning football games. Now look at Watson's line alongside it. 9 of 17, 2 touchdowns in 1 interception, and the completion percentage crowd is already reaching for that number, pointing at the 9 completions, gesturing toward the higher volume. But here's where honest analysis cuts through comfortable narrative. 1 turnover in a competitive practice session against your own defense is not a minor blemish that gets rounded off in the final accounting. That interception is a possession handed to the other team in a real game environment, which is exactly what this competition is being evaluated against. That's 6 potential points walking in the wrong direction. And when you run the direct comparison between a quarterback who produced 3 touchdowns and 0 turnovers against a quarterback who produced 2 touchdowns and handed the defense a free possession, the edge in that comparison goes clearly and unambiguously to Shedeur Sanders on this particular day. That's not a controversial position, that's arithmetic. But the numbers, as meaningful as they are in establishing the foundation, are not the most significant thing that happened during Shedeur's practice performance today. Not even close. There was one moment in today's practice that needs to be isolated, examined, and talked about with the seriousness and the precision that the execution of the throw itself demands. The Isaiah Bond touchdown pass. Let's deal with it the way it deserves to be dealt with. Honestly, carefully, and with the full technical understanding of what separates a good throw from a throw that signals something about the quarterback making it. That pass was not a throw that kept Isaiah Bond busy. It was not a ball that forced Bond to adjust his route, extend his arms awkwardly, fight through contact in a contested window, or make the kind of athletic grab that makes the receiver look good but quietly indicts the quarterback for the imprecision that made the catch difficult in the first place. None of that. The ball hit Isaiah Bond in the chest, in stride, without Bond having to break a single step, alter his trajectory by even a fraction, or make any physical adjustment whatsoever to accommodate a throw that was anything less than exactly where it needed to be. Bond looked back, and the football was already there, already right on time, right on target, delivered at the exact speed and the exact angle that allowed a receiver running a route at full speed to absorb a pass from a quarterback who released the ball before the route was completed, before Bond himself had fully committed to the break, and still have it arrive in his hands at precisely the moment and precisely the location that made the catch not just possible, but effortless. That is what anticipatory precision looks like. That is not a happy accident between a good release and a receiver running a clean route. That is a quarterback who read the coverage before the snap, identified the leverage the defender was playing, understood where the window was going to open, and made the decision to release the football on a timing that required absolute trust in both the receiver running the route and in his own ability to put the ball in a spot that only his guy could reach. That internal processing sequence, coverage recognition pre-snap, route anticipation, early release decision, precise placement, is not something you can coach into a quarterback in a single offseason. It is not something that shows up in a player who is guessing or reacting or simply going through mechanical motions. That processing sequence is the product of genuine football intelligence. It is the output of a mind that understands the geometry of the game at a level that translates directly into the kind of quarterback play that defenses actually have to scheme against. Not a quarterback who is managed by an offense, a quarterback who is a genuine threat to every level of a defense simultaneously, because defenses cannot predict where the football is going before the play develops when the man throwing it is processing faster than the coverage can adjust. There are not many quarterbacks in the National Football League making that throw the way Shedeur Sanders made it today. That's not hype speaking, that's a straight evaluation of what was visible on the tape from that practice session, measured against the standard of what elite National Football quarterbacking looks like in real time. And when that kind of throw comes from a player who is 23 years old and still in the early stages of his professional development, still learning, still building the scar tissue of professional experience, still in a competition for the starting job on his own team, what that throw represents is something that the organizational decision makers in that Cleveland Browns building cannot afford to look past. But before we get to what the organizational decision makers should do with everything they're seeing, and we will get there with full analytical force, let's hear Shedeur himself explain what clicked. After practice, Shedeur talked about what has been different, what shifted, what internal thing changed that has produced the kind of confident, decisive, technically precise quarterback play that showed up on that field today. And the answer he gave deserves more attention than it's getting from the football conversation right now. He talked about his coach, he talked about Monken speaking life into him, and the specific thing he described, the moment that clicked, was a conversation where Monken challenged him directly. If you want to be the best quarterback you can be, Monken told him, then you have to do that on a daily basis. Every day, a daily regimen, daily commitment to the process, without skipping steps, without taking shortcuts, without letting the noise of a competition or the pressure of external expectations interrupt the consistent internal work that actually produces elite development. That conversation became a turning point. Shedeur heard it, processed it and made a decision. He identified the specific area he needed to improve. He committed to approaching that improvement one step at a time, building momentum as each piece clicked into place, adding things as he went, compounding the gains from each deliberate improvement into the next one.
Now understand what that response reveals about the kind of quarterback Shedeur Sanders is and is becoming. Because the easy narrative, the narrative that certain media voices have been comfortable sitting in, is that Shedeur is a raw prospect with an elite pedigree and a famous last name who needs significant time to develop before he's a real factor in the professional game. That narrative treats him as a project, as someone whose talent is potential rather than present. And that particular piece of the story doesn't hold up when you watch a quarterback describe a coaching interaction the way Shedeur described this one. A player who is purely raw, purely projectable, purely dependent on physical gifts that haven't been shaped by real football intelligence doesn't respond to a coaching challenge the way Shedeur described responding to it. He doesn't hear, "You have to do this every day on a daily regimen," and immediately translate that into a specific area of improvement to target, a systematic approach to addressing it, and a discipline to build on those gains step by step without losing the thread. That's the response of a player who has genuine football maturity, a player whose learning curve is steep and fast because the machinery processing the information is built for it. And then he said something that cuts even deeper than the description of his individual improvement process. He called himself a relationship-based person. He said he takes relationships extremely seriously. He said the coaching relationship, the human connection between himself and Monken, is what unlocked the best version of his performance. That matters enormously in a quarterback evaluation, because the quarterbacks who become franchise cornerstones in the National Football League are almost universally players who can take coaching and translate it with velocity, who hear what an offensive coordinator or a head coach is showing them and absorb it at a speed that allows the relationship between coach and player to compound rather than stagnate. When a quarterback tells you that a coaching relationship is what produced his best performance, he's telling you something about his ceiling. He's telling you that with genuine investment from the coaching staff, the output accelerates. And if today's practice performance is what that investment produces in a training camp environment, what does it produce over the course of a full regular season, with real game experience layered on top of the developmental foundation being built right now? That question has an answer, and the organization needs to be honest with itself about what that answer implies. Coach Kevin Monken spoke publicly about the quarterback competition today, and what he said needs to be heard, really heard by every single person who has been consuming the media narrative around this battle and accepting it as a complete, accurate, unfiltered picture of what is genuinely happening inside that Cleveland building. The public is not seeing the whole picture. That's what he said, bluntly, without hedging, without the kind of diplomatic softening that coaches typically reach for when they want to manage expectations without revealing strategic information. He said it plainly, what the outside world sees, what the media reports, what analysts and commentators and social media voices are using as the foundation for their confident public declarations about who is winning this competition. That's a partial view, a fraction of the comprehensive evaluation that Monken and his coaching staff are conducting every single day inside that building. Let that sink in for a real moment, and then apply it directly and specifically to every piece of confident framing that has been circulating through certain media outlets about this quarterback competition. Every report suggesting Watson is clearly ahead. Every analyst piecing together bits of practice footage and secondhand observations into a final verdict on who is winning this contest. Every confident prediction about the direction of the decision that the Cleveland Browns organization is going to make at the quarterback position. All of it, every last bit of confident framing, is built on incomplete information. That is not a talking point. That is not spin from the Sanders camp. That is a direct statement from the head coach who is conducting the evaluation and who has access to the full picture that nobody on the outside can see. And that fact, the simple, blunt, coach-confirmed fact that the public view is partial, should bring a significant amount of humility to every voice that has been speaking with certainty about where this competition is headed. The practice footage that makes it onto social media is a curated slice. The rep counts that get reported are a partial accounting. The observations from media members who have practice access are legitimate but limited data points in a comprehensive evaluation process that is still actively and honestly unfolding. Building a definitive narrative on an incomplete dataset and then defending that narrative with confidence is not analysis, it's storytelling. And Monken just told everyone doing it, publicly, on the record, that the story they're telling is missing chapters they haven't seen.
The honest, intellectually appropriate response to what Monken said is not to dismiss it as strategic vagueness. It's not to assume he's managing expectations or protecting a predetermined outcome with careful public language. It is simply to take his words at face value, recognize the limitation of the outside view, and apply appropriate skepticism to every confident narrative built on information that the head coach himself just told you is incomplete. That's not blind trust in organizational messaging. That's just intellectual honesty about the limits of what external observers can actually know. And when you combine Monken's acknowledgement of the incomplete outside view with the specific language he used to characterize where this competition actually stands, the specific words he chose matter enormously here. The picture that starts to form is very different from the one certain media narratives have been selling. Coach Monken said it plainly: 2 starter-caliber quarterbacks. Not a starter and a backup finding his footing, not a clear front-runner and a developmental prospect getting valuable reps to prepare for a future role. 2 starting-caliber quarterbacks, both players, one position. A genuine, unresolved competition between 2 men who have done enough in this evaluation process to be considered legitimate starting options for a National Football League offense. That characterization is not a throwaway line. That is the most significant framing available from the one person in this entire conversation who sees everything: the full film, the full practice data, the full evaluation, the full picture that he just told us the outside world cannot access. And when that person uses language that places both competitors at a true starting caliber level, what he is communicating, whether he intends every implication of it to land publicly or not, is that this competition is genuinely open, not performed open, not strategically open for the purpose of keeping both players engaged and competitive, actually, honestly, evaluatively open. The decision has not been made, the conclusion has not been reached. The factors that will ultimately determine which quarterback walks out of training camp as the Cleveland Browns' starting quarterback go well beyond what has surfaced in the partial public view that the outside world is working from. Now here is where the analytical work becomes the most important thing in this entire conversation, because if both quarterbacks are at a genuine starting caliber level, and that is the assessment of the head coach who has the complete evaluative picture, then the question that determines everything is not a performance question anymore. The performance question, by Monken's own framing, has been answered the same way for both players. Both are capable, both are starting caliber, both have done enough to be legitimate options. The question that determines everything, the question that should be driving the organizational conversation in that building right now, is an organizational logic question. And the answer to the organizational logic question is not even remotely close. Let's be completely honest about what Deshaun Watson represents in the context of the Cleveland Browns organization right now. Not emotionally, not sentimentally, not through the lens of what Watson was when he left Houston or what his prime represented in terms of talent and potential. Honestly, clearly, with the facts and the trajectory visible to anyone willing to look at them directly. Watson is not the long-term answer at quarterback for this franchise. His performance history since leaving Houston doesn't require inside information or leaked evaluations to understand.
The results have been public, and they have consistently pointed in a direction that no amount of optimistic framing can redirect toward a legitimate long-term competitive foundation. His contract situation, the organizational direction being established by General Manager Andrew Berry, the composition of the roster being assembled around this quarterback competition, all of it points toward Watson functioning as a transitional figure in this building, rather than the quarterback around whom a sustained competitive identity is being built. Starting Watson in 2026 doesn't create anything that compounds. It doesn't build chemistry that grows over multiple seasons. It doesn't develop a player whose ceiling is dramatically higher than the floor Watson is currently showing. It manages the present at the direct expense of the future, and in an organization that is building a younger roster with an eye towards sustainable competitive success, which is the stated organizational direction, starting the transitional veteran over the ascending young talent when both are evaluated as starter-caliber options is not just a missed opportunity, it's an active choice to move slower toward the destination the organization has publicly committed to reaching.
Starting Shedeur Sanders does the opposite of every one of those things simultaneously. Every regular season snap he takes is development that no practice session and no training camp rep can fully replicate. The football intelligence that cannot be manufactured through any other mechanism, reading live defensive schemes with real consequences attached to every decision, processing coverage rotations at NFL speed against players whose entire professional purpose is to make the quarterback wrong, building the instinctive responses that only come from having been in those situations with real stakes. All of that is built through live game experience and only through live game experience. Every mistake he makes in a meaningful game environment that gets processed, corrected, and integrated into his growing understanding of what NFL defenses will show him makes him more complete. It builds the kind of professional growth that transforms talented young quarterbacks into franchise cornerstones. And here is the organizational math that Monken's two starter-caliber quarterbacks framing makes impossible to ignore if you're thinking clearly about the long-term competitive interests of this franchise. If both players are operating at a starting caliber level, and Watson is definitively not the long-term answer, regardless of what he does in 2026, then the risk calculation of starting Shedeur is not nearly as significant as the comfort with the known veteran option might make it feel in the moment. The downside of starting Shedeur is the learning curve. It's real. It exists for every young quarterback who takes full-time starting duties in the National Football League for the first time. There will be uncomfortable moments in certain games where the inexperience shows itself. There will be plays where the processing speed that produced the perfectly placed Isaiah Bond touchdown in training camp practice runs into a defensive wrinkle that the regular season throws at him in ways that training camp never quite does. That curve is real, and it will show itself at points during a competitive season. But the upside of starting Shedeur is a full season of accelerated development for a player whose ascending trajectory points towards sustained excellence, against the downside of a learning curve that every young starting quarterback navigates, regardless of how long they wait on the bench, is not a close calculation. The math points in one direction. The organizational logic of a general manager building a younger roster for long-term competitive success points in the same direction from a completely different analytical angle. Both roads lead to the same destination: start Shedeur Sanders. Now let's deal with something that has been chronically underrated and repeatedly dismissed in the mainstream conversation around Shedeur Sanders and the Cleveland Browns quarterback competition. Coach Monken spoke today about meeting Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, Shedeur's father, and the way Monken framed that interaction, the genuine appreciation he expressed for the opportunity to connect with the man, communicates something meaningful that the cynical framing of Coach Prime's involvement in his son's professional journey has never once been willing to acknowledge. Monken was clear he has a ton of respect for Sanders as a player and for what he has built as a coach. He said he was genuinely looking forward to meeting him. He said that when Coach Prime indicated he was coming but had a commercial commitment, Monken's response wasn't frustration or dismissiveness. It was an open invitation. "Tell me where the next commercial shoot is," Monken essentially said, "and I'll show up."
That is the language of a head coach who views a player's famous parent as a complication to be managed or a distraction to be minimized. That is the language of a football man who genuinely respects another football mind and is actively seeking the connection rather than tolerating it. And that matters. It matters more than the cynical narrative has been willing to give it credit for, because the story that certain voices have been pushing around Coach Prime's involvement in Shedeur's professional career frames it as a liability, a distraction, a complicating factor that NFL teams have to work around, rather than a genuine asset that a young quarterback brings with him into a professional environment. The implication embedded in that framing is that serious NFL coaches view the Sanders family dynamic as something to be contained, that Deion's presence in his son's career is an obstacle to Shedeur's simple, clean, unencumbered professional development. Monken just publicly demolished that narrative, and he's not the first. Garrett Bush had Deion Sanders on the channel weeks ago. Deion spoke about that exchange with the kind of reverence that comes from one serious football mind recognizing another at the highest level. Now, Monken is echoing that sentiment publicly, expressing his own genuine admiration for the opportunity to meet Coach Prime. What emerges from both of those interactions is a picture of mutual respect between serious football people, respect that goes in both directions and is grounded not in celebrity or fame or the entertainment value of the Coach Prime persona, but in the substance of what Deion Sanders actually represents.
This is a Hall of Famer, one of the most decorated athletes in the history of professional football. A man who performed at the absolute apex of professional athletic competition for over a decade under the most intense scrutiny and highest stakes that professional sports can generate. When he speaks about what it takes to succeed at the highest level, he speaks from a depth of personal experience that almost no living person can match. When he engages with his son's development, he brings that depth into the conversation. And when head coaches speak about him with the kind of genuine respect that Monken expressed today, they're not being polite. They're recognizing something real. The Sanders family's relationship with the Cleveland Browns coaching staff is built on sincere, mutual respect, not managed tension, not strategic tolerance of a high-profile family dynamic, genuine mutual admiration between football people who recognize each other's seriousness. And that foundational relationship, that genuine investment in the full context of who Shedeur Sanders is, where he comes from, and what he carries into that building every single day, is the kind of environment in which a young quarterback's development doesn't just happen, it accelerates. A coaching staff that genuinely respects the full context of a young quarterback, including his family, his formation, his complete history, is a coaching staff that invests in his success with authenticity rather than treating the competition as a performance to manage until the predetermined outcome becomes convenient to announce. Now we stop and look at everything that came out of Cleveland today as a single complete picture rather than isolated pieces, because the pieces are individually meaningful, but together, assembled honestly with clear eyes and real analytical commitment, they tell a story that the noise of the mainstream narrative has been doing its best to prevent anyone from hearing clearly. In one recorded practice session, Shedeur Sanders threw 3 touchdown passes in 0 interceptions. One of those touchdown passes, the Isaiah Bond connection, was one of the most technically precise throws produced during this entire competition period. It was a perfectly timed, perfectly placed delivery requiring anticipatory processing that operates at the level of the very best quarterback play in professional football. Bond didn't fight for that football. He looked back and it was already exactly where it needed to be. That throw doesn't come from a raw prospect who needs years before he can contribute. That throw comes from a quarterback who is already operating in critical moments at an elite cognitive and mechanical level. Coach Monken confirmed publicly and directly that the outside world is not seeing the full picture of this competition, that the partial view available through practice footage, rep counts, and media access is a fraction of the comprehensive evaluation his coaching staff is conducting. Every narrative built with certainty on that partial view, every confident media declaration about Watson being ahead, about the door being closed, or even mostly closed for Shedeur, is built on an incomplete foundation that the head coach just told everyone publicly and on the record is not the whole story. Coach Monken looked at both quarterbacks in this competition with the full evaluative picture that only he and his staff possess, and characterized them both as starter caliber. Not a starter and a developmental backup, not a veteran frontrunner and a promising prospect. Two genuine starter caliber options for a National Football offense. That characterization, coming from the only person in this conversation with the complete information, means the competition is genuinely open. It has not been decided. The evaluation is actively unfolding, and the factors that will determine the outcome extend well beyond what the public has been given access to. Coach Monken expressed real, unambiguous appreciation for meeting Deion Sanders, not tolerance, not diplomatic management of an awkward family dynamic, genuine admiration from one serious football person for another. The Sanders family's relationship with the Cleveland Browns coaching staff is built on mutual respect that the cynical framing of Coach Prime's involvement has been trying to undermine for weeks. That cynical framing is not supported by anything either Monken or his staff has actually said or done in observable reality. Add all of it up, the touchdown performance, the Bond throw, the Shedeur comments about his coaching relationship and the discipline that clicked, Monken's confirmation that the outside view is partial, the two starter-caliber quarterbacks framing, the organizational logic that overwhelmingly favors starting the ascending young talent over the transitional veteran, the genuine mutual respect between the coaching staff and the Sanders family that creates the kind of environment where a young quarterback's development compounds rather than stagnates.
What emerges from all of it is not ambiguous, not if you're looking at it honestly, not if you're willing to apply real organizational thinking instead of comfortable familiarity with the veteran option. Shedeur Sanders is the quarterback this franchise should be building around. The competition is real and ongoing, Monken made that clear, but the evidence is building with every practice, every throw, and every coaching comment toward a conclusion that becomes harder and harder to argue against the more honestly the full picture gets examined. Today was a significant day, a day where the performance matched the organizational logic and the coaching framing all aligned toward the same outcome. The contest is not over, the evaluation continues, but the direction the evidence is pointing, clearly, honestly, and analytically, is not the direction a significant portion of the media narrative has been comfortable pointing its audience toward. And that gap between what the evidence says and what the narrative has been selling is exactly the kind of gap that eventually closes when reality catches up to the story being told. The question isn't whether Shedeur Sanders can be the quarterback this franchise builds around. He answered that today with a touchdown pass that landed in Isaiah Bond's chest without Bond breaking a single stride. The question is whether the organization has the clarity and the conviction to act on what the evidence is plainly showing them before the moment to make that decision with maximum developmental upside slips by. Drop your thoughts in the comments. The conversation is just getting started.